Oh, welcome to this video. Thanks for tuning in and sharing in this now moment with myself and with one another. If you haven't seen these videos before, welcome and welcome back. If you have, my intention is unity and oneness in the highest levels of love light. I wanted to go into so many different things. I've been a little offline for a little bit, mostly doing snippets of pieces of writings that I've compiled that hold certain codes and pieces of information that are connected to many different subsets or bubbles of reality. I just rolled right into it, didn't I? I'm going to show a little picture that I drew of some pictures that I've been receiving about what's happening in our reality from my perspective. Everything I share is from my perspective, and it's based on my own experiences and what I receive as uploads or downloads from the earth, from the universe, from my higher self. And essentially, we all have access to these bits, if you will, of information that can sometimes feel scrambled when we are ourselves feeling scrambled. And so one of the things that I've learned is that we're going through a descrambling. And so what happens is, if you picture a coil with all of this information and that coil starts to open up, we begin to see these individual letters that were coded within that coil that were all mushed together before. And as they begin to peel apart, we begin to see this letter on the bottom and this letter on the top. And then that can seem scrambled still because we don't necessarily see how they're connected. But we're starting to see a lot of different pieces of information that seems disconnected, that's actually tied together as is everything, right? Everything is connected. So that's one of the biggest messages that I've been kind of receiving. Just to kind of share, I'll talk a little bit about ascension symptoms, not a lot because I've covered it so much. If you haven't seen these videos, I invite you to go back and watch the video I did quite some time ago titled Ascension Symptoms, if you feel called to. There's so many wonderful people out there who are sharing their experiences and talking about how they have been dealing with these ascension symptoms, which I like to lovingly refer to as upgrades. Because what I was shown, and I'll talk a little bit about that, it's like acclimating to when you scuba dive. If you've ever gone scuba diving, you have to equalize the pressure. Otherwise, your eardrums can pop, or your sinuses get stopped, or you can't go down. You have to let the air out, or you have to equalize slowly so that you can be comfortable in the environment that you're diving into. And the way that I see it is ascension, if we want to label it as such, is just like that. We aren't going up, we are expanding out. And as we expand out, we go deeper, we become the deep divers, and we go up at the same time, simultaneously. So there's a lot of crackling and creaking and popping that goes on as this happens, not only within our body, but also with everything else that is also going through this process, such as the earth, such as the sun, such as all of the planets that are held within this bubble, we'll just say of the Milky Way. But it's always, of course, beyond that, because we live within a bubble, within a bubble, within a bubble, which, as I've learned, are referred to as subsets from my perspective. And I've done videos about that as well. Someday I'll organize my videos and make it easier to go back and play with what I've played with, but it's not necessary right now per se, or maybe ever, I don't know. So what I'm being shown is, as we equalize, as we essentially adapt to the pressure, we begin to experience things. I guess I just rolled right into it, didn't I? We're talking about time here. We're talking about time and how we interact with our reality, how that's changing. And this shifts how we view our reality. So I'm sharing this because this has been, a lot of us have been experiencing really heightened symptoms. There are some people that might say, well, the reason we're experiencing ascension symptoms is because we're not letting go. We're not allowing ourselves to just relax. And I would definitely agree with that. I would also add to that that sometimes it's just our bodies adapting to the changes in pressure. Our bodies adapting to our adaptation is changing. Our body is changing based on our needs. So we might feel certain things changing, and that's part of our evolution, which I'm not going to say evolution is different than ascension. I don't get caught up in the differentiation of words necessarily, because I like to play with all of the letters and rearrange them in different subsets and categories. So there are some people that would argue or venture to say that it's different, and that's true. Evolution is not necessarily the same as ascension, but I'm just utilizing many of the words I have to just be very broad and not necessarily compartmentalized in what those meanings are in differentiation. Some people are really good at that. That's what they do, and it's valuable. But I'm just sharing very broad across the board perspective. And the reason I'm sharing that, from my perspective, we're having some of these symptoms just because we're adapting, is because sometimes we can get into fear, or better spoken, not just fear, but judgment about our experiences. We might hear someone say, well, we're experiencing physical pain because, like Dan Winter has said, when I've listened to him before, it's a leak in your charge. So something there needs to be brought back to wholeness and completeness so that the charge isn't escaping and we're not feeling pain in that area. So I would say that's a very beautiful way of describing it. On the flip side, or in addition to that, I would also venture to say that sometimes when we feel these things, we can get into a space and go, oh, well, then that must mean I'm not doing something right. Or that must mean that I'm not accepting what's happening in my life. And I would venture to say that this can also be some things that maybe we haven't processed. Maybe there was an experience where we had a broken heart, and now we're having shoulder pain and back pain. And it might just be that we're in the process of bringing those back into wholeness, or our body is trying to direct our awareness to that particular area to show us perhaps what is already in the process of being integrated or healed, or maybe needs to be integrated and healed. And sometimes part of that acceptance and letting go is just accepting that we may be in a space of discomfort today, and not necessarily trying to figure out what we're doing wrong, and better spoken, what we could be doing better. And what we could be doing better may just mean the resistance that we're feeling is because we're not necessarily giving our body what it needs. It may not be that we're in a place of anger or fear. It could be that we just need to go get a massage. It could be that we just need to shift something in our diet. It could be that our pineal gland is in the process of, and again, this is not to be taken literally, because I know people talk about the pineal gland calcifying. The more research that I do in my own journey, the more I recognize that is not necessarily literal, and sometimes it can be literal. So when I think of a buildup of plaque, I mentioned this in one of my previous videos, we're vibrating that plaque off of our teeth. We're vibrating that plaque off of our pineal, off of our glands, off of our fascia, off of our organs. So it doesn't necessarily mean, it just means that we're changing the vibration, and some of those areas that have had a little bit more buildup or toxicity or rigidity are starting to open, and that can feel very uncomfortable at times. And that's when we might look at that and say, okay, am I in resistance to the changes that are going on within my body, within my environment, within my relationships, within my speech patterns, whatever it might be? And that might be the resistance. And sometimes it's about us just letting go and allowing us to feel the discomfort and recognize that this too shall pass. So I hope I went into several different areas there, but that's what I've been feeling, experiencing, and seeing. I've gone through quite a few upgrades, and whenever I think that we're done going through upgrades, here comes another one. So I've just kind of learned to ride that wave in the best way that I can. And sometimes I forget. My friends will remind me about certain things that I maybe kind of forgot or put to the wayside because I thought, oh, I don't need to do that anymore. I don't need to meditate as much as I did. Or maybe I just got lazy, or I don't need to eat necessarily in the same way that I did. But when I have 3 or 4 people that mention something to me to try in conversation, or they've mentioned that they're trying this, I like to look into a little bit to see, is that for me? Or is this just a collective habit that's forming for a certain group of people because it's trendy? So these are all good questions to ask ourselves. Are we doing something because we feel it's good for us? Or are we doing something based on a habit or a pattern that somebody else is that we feel the need to conform to? So this not is necessarily referencing diet. It also references or represents collective patterning. So this has been coming up for me as well. What else? I guess this is a little bit of an energy update. So what I was shown was our reality bubbles within a bubble within a bubble. I shaped it like this because we'll call this 3D. And what I was shown was this is actually, some people are saying, well, we're going to be moving out of that and into something else, into a brand new version of Earth. I don't see it that way. I see it as, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they're wrong or right. It's just their interpretation and my interpretation might be slightly different. But what I was shown is, let's look at these as subsets, and we'll say that this little nugget in the middle has a lot of density. Well, I was shown essentially that we're expanding out, right? And we're expanding out, and we're expanding out. And we're also going deeper at the same time. So what happens is, as we expand out, these edges now are out here, right? And then what happens is, when these two connect and we essentially bring together or weave in with this particular 3 waves, right? This begins to dissolve. So I was shown this dissolves. And then all of that stuff that was in here is now merged with what's in here. And it's held within this bigger bubble. So that could be seen as dimensions. It could be seen as density, whatever we want to call it. And these are bubbles within bubbles, or subsets. So subset A is still part of subset B, right? And I've done a video on that before. I don't think I labeled it subsets, but you could look it up and see what that does for you. And so as we expand out, we still have all of that information and everything that was in there before, but now it holds a different charge, or it doesn't hold a charge. So the things that no longer hold the pattern or the vibration in it that is part of our foundation begins to disintegrate and becomes absorbed into that bubble. So it's the process of expansion and absorption. We could also look at it as, if we want to just be really basic, not in a bad way, but we could look at this as the flower of life, right? So what does that look like? What happens is this then becomes this, and then it becomes this. But I was just shown this starts to dissolve, right? And it becomes one. And so it can feel wonky. It can feel awkward, because it's like we're this big balloon We feel bigger than we were before. And we also recognize that we're part of something bigger than we realized before, which can sometimes actually make us feel smaller. So it's this balance that we're learning to find between being more expansive and stepping up into this greater expansiveness, and then realizing how much more we are, but also how much more everything else is. And how we start to recognize that certain things that we thought were big, no longer, we're looking down at it, not from a hierarchy, not from I'm better than that now, but seeing it as no longer relevant. It no longer holds that charge, that ignition fuel, because we're utilizing a different fuel to ignite us, which is our sole purpose in this lifetime or this particular version of reality. Some of us are merging with other versions of ourselves, if we want to call it that, and utilizing that knowledge in this lifetime. So it becomes less divided though, and it becomes more of a, what I'm hearing is somatic. So I talk about the writing that I do is somatic writing, but it's a soma, right? Oh, there's so much more. I always say that, but it becomes this expansive space of creation. And this is something that many of us are not necessarily used to operating within. It's like being introduced into, you lived in a box and now you step outside of the box and it's this bigger space. It can feel, that can make you feel smaller. It can make us feel sometimes unsafe. It can make us feel insecure or not secure in our foundation because we're still in the process of adapting. And what I recorded this morning, essentially from my perspective, was that as we adapt to this, as we vibrate at this higher frequency, as we begin to see more, utilizing our glandular, boy, there's so much. Let me just go backwards for a moment. As we begin to utilize this, we become more compatible with our surroundings. We become less compatible with compaction and compression. So that's a play on words, meaning we can't fit everything into that small space anymore. We have to move out. We have to move away from certain people, places, or things. Yet at the same time, some of us don't even need to move away from it. We're already moving away from it energetically. So while many of us felt the need to move to different places, now some of us are feeling a little bit like we don't need to move. We're in the right place. We just need to move. We need to move our energy differently. We need to move our conversations into a different wavelength. We need to maybe move and change our thought patterns so that we can already begin to see that we're already here, right? So we're already in this higher framework. And so it's just this feeling that we're not, that is the residue, the residual, the hangover, as I call it. So many of us are experiencing that hangover because it's the hangers-oners, it's those people in our lives that just can't quite adapt or move. And that's okay. It's not about them. That's where they're at. And it's not to say that that other reality isn't gone. They may still be within that network, within that box. That might be someplace that they're not ready or feeling uncomfortable enough to move out of. That would be a whole other video, because we could go into so many different layers there. Like, well, does that mean that they're going to be stuck there and we're no longer going to be around them? They're going to go to a different world? I'm not here in this segment or video, or really at all, to argue anyone's perspective. That's not my thing. That's not my thing. That's not my thing. But what I am here to share is that from my perspective, that's not how I see things. I see things as it's almost like what I would visualize our galactic brothers and sisters. They can see us because they're out here and their expanse is so big, but we can't see them. From one perspective, the angels or the higher sound harmonic beings are able to see everything that we can't see because they are encompassing that bigger bubble. And so we begin to see more out of our periphery. So those that are locked in that lower density, and again, density and dimensions I know are different things, but I'm just going to use it for basic terminology. They're held with, or encapsulated within this thicker membrane that is more of a tunnel vision. They really think sometimes that they've expanded out and they can see everything because they're feeling it too. And there is no us, them. We are them. They are us. So I bring that in because we are really being called to step away from focusing on that. We're not necessarily needing to bring them with us. We are already holding that bigger bubble and they're already in it too. So when I drew that smaller bubble within the bigger bubble, it still was inside of it. It just didn't know it was. So it's always been here from my perspective, right? So when you have these, I'm just going to go with the same color, right? And you're in this little guy, you're still inside of this, which is still inside of this donut, right? And it's just this swirl of layers of reality. So they're with us. I know there's some that say, oh, we're going to go into a different this or a different that. And that is what it is. I see it a little differently. I just see that we're all sharing these subsets or these bubbles within bubbles, and how we choose to express ourselves or experience our reality is what gives us access to more or less from one perspective. Okay, so that was the kind of little energy update that I wanted to give. My personal experience is it's been a very strenuous a week for me energetically. There were a lot of upgrades that happened. There were a lot of moments of confusion followed by ahas based on my own journeying. I had some amazing sessions with light workers. We're all working with the light and the shadow. We're all working and playing in this environment, right? But I had moments where the changes sometimes happen so quickly. If you're working in these realms of clairaudience or clairvoyance or clairsit, whatever it is, telepathy, grid work, I feel that all of that has shifted for many of us. And I had moments that I had to kind of let go of my fear around, am I activating this person too quickly? And I had to remind myself, I'm not doing this. This is their choice to participate. So I've seen what happens is people will become afraid of themselves. And that's the next layer I wanted to talk about. There are many of us who are very powerful healers. We've done this lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. We are the shaman. We are the star warrior. We are the whatever we want to label ourselves as. It's inside of us. It's in our DNA. It's all inside of you. So when we touch those deeper layers inside the deeper heart, this deeper well of love, it can flood us with emotions of shame, fear, all of the things, or the plaque that builds up on the heart. The calcification falls away and we feel the Band-Aid pull off, and it feels like release and relief followed by emotions that we've been covering up. Fear can come up. And many of us fear our power because that's what we've been taught to be afraid of. Don't do that because that's against this rule. That we're These rules were created in order to keep us in that place. Could you imagine if we were all walking around reading each other's thoughts and healing each other based on eye contact and assisting each other through teleportation? I mean, if we were all doing that, then what need would we have for a lot of the building blocks of the 3D? We wouldn't. And so from one perspective, we don't anymore. But from another perspective, we have to adapt slowly you can't remove all of it right away. It has to kind of come in pieces sometimes for certain people, because when you open it, you feel naked. You feel so light. You feel a feeling that you've never allowed yourself to feel before, or you didn't know that you could feel this way. And it becomes scary for certain people. And it then brings up all the other things that fear, those memory nodes or those patterns can sometimes then be reactivated. We sometimes hold ourselves back because of habit patterns, what we've been taught, what we've been read, what our parents have told us, what we've told ourselves. And this isn't just in this lifetime, many lifetimes. And now we're in a space of where many of us are recognizing that that doesn't matter anymore. That doesn't mean that we still don't have residue and residual calcification or chunks of emotions that are still needing to be integrated. And it's a beautiful process, because when we allow ourselves to feel these pieces, it is absorbed back into the wholeness of who we really are. And it becomes usable energy that we can then feed back into our fascia network of humanity, earthlings, if you will. And again, I've been called to bring up, there's some people that say, well, Carrie, we're not on Earth anymore. Now it's Terra. Now it's Gaia. It's not really called that. That's fine. I love that idea of playing with those other ideas, and that may be true. But again, my mission, or one of my missions, we could call it such, intentions, is to just share and be open about my perspective, which may not hold all of the pieces, but it may hold just enough to bring us into a different awareness or a simplicity, as hence Keep It Simple Starseeds, because sometimes we can get caught up, myself included, in the definition, the defining characterization of reality. This must mean this, and we are no longer here, so we are here, so that means this. And then sometimes we can fall in this back into another habit pattern or cycle of locking ourselves into a bigger box. And so I don't know everything. I like not knowing everything. It makes it more fun for me. And I like to learn. I feel very empowered by learning, and learning is important. But the more we learn about ourselves, from what I see, the more we recognize that a lot of the stories that we've told, we're changing those stories. We're beginning to, I could go into a different subset there, and I will touch on that briefly. It is important to stay true to our roots and our heritage. And when I say heritage, I hear hair, H-E-I-R. I hear the 3 hairs, the toroidal spin, and then the hairs, the fibers that connect us to more of us. It's not about necessarily who we are or who we think we are in this lifetime. It's who we are at the core as a human. To me, that is our heritage. So when I buy into or add value to a story or give my energy to a story, my question is, does that support who I am at the center and my core. And so while I recognize I do have Native American, Cherokee, Chippewa in my ancestry, I do have all these pieces. They are at the heart of my, and much more, not just that, obviously, but I'm just sharing that's an aspect of me that's a piece of the puzzle that adds up to the completion of who I am. But it isn't only, even if I put all those pieces together in my DNA, it's not who I really am. Therefore, is what I'm believing and buying into adding to that, or is it taking it away from? And when we are looking at things from this size of a box, we think that perhaps what we're participating in is adding more to our life. We're changing things based on this box. But then we get outside of that and we look back at the box from a more expansive space and we say, wow, that box really fit well in 3D. It doesn't fit anymore. But are we taking with us those concepts and thoughts that boxed us in the 3D in the first place and trying to take that with us into these higher and more expansive spaces? It doesn't work. All of a sudden, we start to see that these changes that are being, let's say, portrayed. Here you go. Here's the changes. We're going to do this to support humanity. We start to open our resonance to recognition that that is not real in the new reality. That may seem real. It no longer supports who we are. So ideas or concepts about a particular race or a particular culture or a particular, let's say, political view, we start to recognize that this is not really supporting humanity. It just looks like it is. However, we step even away from that and we get back to the core of it. What supports humanity? Heart-centered awareness. Know thyself. Treat your neighbor with kindness. The golden rule. And it all seems so simple. Then we realize that no matter what subset or bubble we are in, we can get locked into frameworks, idiosyncrasies, that ideologies, egocentricies that are not necessarily a representation, a true representation. We start to see that certain things don't add up and they become more transparent. So I was shown the veil of, let's say, this bubble, and this is relevant, about transparency. So this bubble, all of a sudden we expand out and we look back at this and we can see how dark and coagulated it is. And as we begin to expand our heart frequency out and make these adaptations to be more, when I say human, I don't see it as just a person walking around. I see a rainbow of light encapsulated within a body of skin technology. I see our body as a vehicle, and we're essentially upgrading from a Pinto, I don't know why that's coming up, to a Ferrari, or not even, that's not even. So I'm being called to talk about that. We're going from a Pinto, which if you don't know what that is, it's kind of a funny little car, to a Ferrari. But in reality, we're going from a Pinto to a spaceship. But in reality, we're going from a Pinto to being able to teleport without the need of a spaceship. So that's how quickly, so there's people that have gone from a Pinto to a Ferrari and they are like, yeah, I've made it. I know it. I've got power. I'm driving faster than everybody. I have more value, whatever it might be. Not even recognizing that that's already old. That's all in here. in here, we don't need a car with wheels. We're going in the air. I'm just using this as a metaphor, an example. Here we're going into space travel. Here we're just teleporting. And that's not even the accurate necessary description, but that's really what it looks like. So being aware that we might be in a Ferrari, but recognizing that there's a lot more than even that. So this is causing a little bit of that because that's all together in that big bubble, in these subsets. We're next to all of those things. We're interacting with all of those things because we are part of all things. So the human is this rainbow color technology, right? The coat of many colors. And how we operate it is really based on our core technology, our core beliefs, our core frequency. And so as we change this, that's when we really begin to hone in on there's no place like home and utilize everything to our ability. Okay, what else? That was a pretty, I think, lengthy energy update as to what I've been shown as a good description of what's happening from my perspective in our reality. I'm going to just kind of end on that note. And I want to just share, how do I explain the level of appreciation that I have? I have such swings of emotion, such great levels of just pure love that comes through. But as a human, I feel fear. I feel anger. I feel emotions. This is part of who we are. It doesn't mean that we're moving away from that. We're utilizing these emotions, energy in motion, emotion. I think I did a video on that as well, to then move us. That song moved me. That means we moved. Something happened. There was an action that occurs because of these things, because of these charges. So the more we can utilize these and not get locked into any of these subsets, we begin to interact with each other differently. We begin to see ourselves differently. This doesn't mean it's always going to feel the same way day to day. And I'm going back to the fear of our own power. I feel like that's this next collective level of awakening. There's going to be a lot of people that are afraid of what they are seeing. And I'm bringing it back to my healing sessions. I've done healing sessions with people who are these powerful. I see that they're intuitive, or I see that their gift is earth grid work, or I see that their gift is like a galactic connection where they're using symbols and technology. So they have access to this. And let's say that person might be an electrical engineer. And they'll feel certain things electrically when I work with them. I'm sharing this with you guys because a lot of you guys might be experiencing this just on your own. And then all of a sudden something happens and it's like, whoa, okay, that was weird. I didn't like it. That I feel like my head just popped. I feel like my tingles went up my spine. My hands are on fire. That's weird, because that's not something that that person is used to experiencing. So oftentimes I'm called to go slow with certain people, to try to meet them at where they're at. Because some of us, and this is not a hierarchy thing, some of us are already in that bigger bubble. So we're used to experiencing that already. And that person next to us may never have experienced that before. So I've been called lately to really try to explain the process a little bit more and to try to help people recognize that this is already within them. I'm not doing anything. They're opening to the bubble that I'm in. They're expanding out and they're actually, I'm not necessarily meeting them where they're at. I'm already in that space. They're expanding out to meet me. Now that person may be amazingly brilliant and their bubble of brilliance is out here. And by me interacting with them, I get to experience that brilliance as well, because we're all part of the same bubbles, if that makes sense. And then I get to expand and meet them where they're at. That doesn't mean I'm lowering my frequency to meet them where they're at. It just means I'm not blasting them with everything I've got. I'm feeling into that space and coordinating according to their map. Right? So their map might look like this. And here I am coordinating, connecting in that way. Musical note. I'm creating a musical note or a musical chord that can then tune in and shift their frequency and vibration. So recognizing that we're going to feel things that are strange. And so we might have these healing experiences that can be scary for both of us. And it's fun and exciting, and we're in just such a really magical space. The more we can open to the magic and the wonder is the other word that came through this morning. All who wonder are not lost. Staying in that wonder and awe of, wow. Just play with it and not be afraid of it. Because when we're in our hearts, when we're truly in a place of compassion and love, what I've been told over and over again by my team, my higher self, my future version of me, whatever we want to label it as, source energy, it dissolves, right? This middle bubble, it just dissolves it. And it no longer pokes holes in our fields, or if it does, because we had that momentary imbalance, we recognize it. Oh, that's why I was being shown. So let's pretend that bubble. So as we get closer to here, we can see this more. But we can also see this coming out to meet us. So we may not have realized that that deeper bubble was there. We start to turn around and look at it. And what was this wall now becomes this shimmering light that gets thinner and thinner and thinner. So from a higher, when we're expanding out, we then meet that membrane and we're absorbed into it. The stuff that we look back at gets absorbed into our higher bubbles. So what happens is we are not just seeing the beautiful shimmering light that we're expanding out into, we're also looking back and seeing this, like this thick, thick, thick bubble. We're seeing that and we're focusing our heart-centered awareness on it by saying, I see you. And then this slowly begins to dissolve as it expands out. And we look at it with new eyes. We look at it, we see through the veil. And all of a sudden these distortions are like, we're like, wait a minute. No, I do not consent. That is not my reality that I choose to express within. And pop goes the weasel, because the weasel goes pop. All right, I'm going to dip out from there and go into a completely different video where I share the codes that I've been writing in a very sing-song way and talk about what those meanings were. I'll continue the video I never completed around the gold. So, and the new elements and things like that. So in love and light, guys, thank you so much for tuning in and sharing in this now moment with myself and with one another, truly. And I invite you to share these videos with anyone you feel guided that might benefit from it. I didn't really go into it, and I'll just end on this note. There is a thing that's happening to many of us in the spiritual, dare I call it that, because all of it's spiritual. If you want to look at it as way, we're all spirit embodied. But in the community of us that participates in things such as I participate in, there's this thing going on called shadow banning. And it really has affected how many people are impacted by these messages. And it's interesting to me that I see some people who are talking about things that are very linear, that have good points, but also have a little bit of that shadow flavor mixed in with it, that aren't having any repercussions. And so that's curious to kind of look at, because recognizing that some of the beings that we're listening to are encouraged to keep talking about what they're talking about, because there are sprinkles of fear in there. It's fascinating. And I gain perspective from listening to them sometimes, and recognizing that there's a lot of beautiful light workers out there that have a really great message. And if there's a little fear sprinkled in there, is that triggering us? Is that causing us to feel nervous, anxiety? I'm not saying don't listen to them. What I'm saying is utilize that as a tool to recognize the charge that's coming from inside of us, to see what's triggering us still. And also recognize that some of that stuff that's sprinkled in isn't necessarily, we'll just say it's on purpose, but that doesn't make it bad. So I just went into a whole other framework there, but just being cognizant, being aware of our feelings. And it doesn't mean that we don't necessarily resonate with that person. We just might not resonate with that part of their message, because they might be tapping or tuning into the lower frequencies that may be relevant to bring up, so that we can look back like the bubble I just showed and see that part of the veil. And we can utilize that as a sounding board to hear, wow, okay, that's where they're at. That's interesting. How did that make me feel? Because I don't feel like that's where I'm at. Rather than going, ooh, I trust this person and what they have to share. That must mean this is what's happening. We're being called to use our discernment. Nobody has all the pieces, but a lot of beautiful people have many of the pieces. So when we use our own discernment, if this is eliciting fear within us, we might be called to recognize that that message may not have been meant to elicit fear. That might just be on us. Or maybe it was meant to elicit fear. Therefore, it may not be 100% because it's carried within this box. And that particular speaker may have a really expansive view inside of here. And they've expanded out. And they're encompassing a lot of that other stuff. And that's okay too. But using our own discernment to recognize that is really, really important right now. So I guess that's where I wanted to go with that. So in love and light, guys, thank you so much. Namaste.